Welcome to the Windrush Foundation series of interviews. This is commemorating the Windrush 75, and today we are very pleased to have Junior Bogle. Welcome.
Thank you, Cindy.
Greetings.
Greetings and welcome London, the further geographical regions of Britain and globally whoever's watching.
This is very true because you never know where this is going.
Correct.
So, if people don't know about you and don't know about your family name, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and in regards to the legacy of that name that you hold?
Well, I'm Junior Bogle, and my community is a North West London community where we're known, and further back to Jamaica, our family was part of Jamaican national history. In fact, one of 7 national heroes of Jamaica, i.e. the Baptist deacon Paul Bogle. Paul Bogle was the individual that he was a Baptist deacon. He had his own church ministry, deaconized by William George Gordon, and he was the single individual that led the march from Stony Gut in St. Thomas, Jamaica, to what was then the capital, Spanish Town Governor General Erie's residence. But he walked with a handful of supporters some 30-odd miles in blazing heat. In fact, there was a record produced by the reggae group Third World called 96 Degrees in the Shade. That was actually the recorded temperature of what it was in the shade. So imagine out in the open, walking that distance there and back to address and hand over a petition that was signed by many members of a committee, what he was part of, to deliver that petition to the Governor General, Governor Erie, who, if you can imagine or comprehend the racism and the disrespect to our Afro-Caribbean people, he was denied an audience or entry into the governor's house, who ran him away from his door, and which Paul wasn't disheartened, turned around and returned on a very long walk back to St. Thomas, where we came from. And when he returned to St. Thomas, everybody was excited for his return, knowing that he's a man of his word, and if he's going to deliver or say he's going to deliver, he usually does. And the people of St. Thomas on his return were saying, Brother Paul, what's the news? What's the news? What you have for me? And he says, my brothers and sisters, there is no news. And for a change to come, blood have to run. And it's time to put our shoulders to the wheel. And they went onto the courthouse in Morant Bay, where a lot of other things was going on at the time. And there was an individual that was arrested, wrongfully arrested, and over land and his horse that had strayed onto the land, and they captured the horse and misappropriated the law to this individual. And basically, on the day in question, when they marched onto the courthouse, there was a large group of people, hundreds upon hundreds of people, and the Governor General ordered his militia to open fire on the crowd. And the first person to be shot was a lady, a mother of the Gia family, and both her and her daughter, Mrs. Gia, was shot dead. And that just lit the fuse and sparked off what then became the Morant Bay Rebellion, where it ignited civil war in Jamaica.
And so for you as a family member, as a cousin, I know you've maybe briefly spoken about this, but how did you first find out about him, and what impact did it have on you growing up?
Well, growing up, many of us received news how things were conveyed back in the 60s when I was growing up through reggae music. So reggae music was like the messenger, you know, and through hearing about my family by artists such as Burning Spear, Bob Marley himself, vocalizing both Marcus Garvey, Jesus Christ, and Paul Bogle in one of his hit songs, So Much Things to Say. They sold Marcus Garvey for rice, they turned their back on Paul Bogle. Who he's actually referencing in that record was the Maroons, an independent group of people that had fought many rebellions in the passage of time over a few hundred years, and was given their own independence, led by a lady by the name of Nanny, who also had Kodjo, her brothers, and other individuals. But the Maroons were given their own independence, but you have separate groups of Maroons. And Paul Bogle approached them prior to the uprising that if the day came to that, they would support him. And come the day in question, they basically turned their back on him as a result of an informant that had conveyed to the Governor General what was to take place. The Maroons were told that they couldn't get involved because of the peace treaty, what they signed in 1738 as a result of Nanny's Maroon War. But if they had taken the time to read that treaty, they would have seen that that treaty was now null and void, because it was to suppress a slave revolt or attack on the island by outsiders, i.e. the Spaniards, the French, the Portuguese, so on and so forth. So that was misdirected to them, which they agreed to stay neutral. So when Paul Bogle turned to them on the day for help, they turned their back on him, which is what Bob Marley sings in his record, So Much Things to Say. Mm-hmm. They turned their back on Paul Bogle. He's making reference to the Maroons. And the uprising went on for about a fortnight, from the early part, the second week in October, concluded towards the end of October, where a lot of our family members, the younger members, children, were rounded up and slaughtered as retribution, which this is not written or recorded in history books. But a lot of our family members fled St. Thomas, and 3 family members, siblings, Paul Bogle, Moses Bogle, and Miriam Bogle, was hung as a subsequence of their involvement in the Morant Bay Rebellion. Miriam and Moses were hung the day before Paul, who were also hung the same day as William George Gordon, who was a very close friend of Bogle, and he was who deaconized Paul Bogle. So there's many falsities what starts saying that Paul Bogle wasn't actually a Baptist deacon. He actually was, and he was deaconized by Gordon, his good friend. And there's another falsity going around that's being started and going around for some 10 years now, that actually was started by the Jamaican Gleaner newspaper, that the image of Paul Bogle is not Paul Bogle, but of an American inventor named Jenkins or Jennings. And I wrote to the Gleaner about that over 10 years ago, who's failed to reply. I also have written several emails to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London to validate something completely different but pertaining to Paul Bogle. And today I've not had a reply from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. So it makes you think, what's really going on here? But
so the same energy and that same passion and that same kind of vigour that your family member had, you're having to fight today
to prove and justify and validate certain principles of order.
So in that regard, so just to go back a little bit, so when did you first hear of Paul Bogle when you were growing up? How did you, just to touch on that slightly?
Growing up, we had pictures on our wall in our front room parlour where there was a large picture of Paul Bogle in our front room, so you couldn't help but know this man had the same name as yourself. And also the map of Jamaica, which most Jamaicans had in their house, taking pride of place on the wall. Also, within this picture was the 7 national heroes of Jamaica. So, growing up, we knew who we were, and through, like I said, music, hearing snippets of things, what happened, and who this great man was. And also later on in life, growing up and looking into our own history and researching our own history, because history in schools when I was growing up was not something that was taught concerning Afro-Caribbeans. History is like, it was not in their interest to teach you who you were, what you are, and who you truly are. So many of us, influenced through and by Rastafarian elders, were who taught us history, and we took it to another level, going deeper and to depths that have challenged very prominent people and corrected them and put them in order.
So can I just, again, because I know that we've only got a very short period of time, and I know there's so much that you can actually delve into, not just your family history, but so many other areas of community and education and things like that, and whether it's health and well-being. But can you just say, so it seems to me that you have become a historian of your family and obviously of other people. And I know you've just come back from Jamaica, and you mentioned... I'm not jealous at all. And I know that this legacy is something that you have to constantly, as they say, like a pilot has to constantly correct the course.
Correct.
So in regards to you documenting, I know you mentioned earlier that other relatives and other members of your family, and you mentioned about the national anthem and things like that. So how does, because I want to bring some of these things that you found out.
Well, what people are not aware of then, in quite a few things, that also after becoming independent in August 1962, there was the composition of the music for the Jamaican national anthem. And interestingly, and this is something that was conveyed to myself from childhood by my father to me, but the Jamaican national anthem, the music, was composed by a gentleman named Robert Lightbourne, who's actually a lateral family to us. And Robert Lightbourne is actually a Bogle descendant. So you've got the continuity of the history there in history.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. Wow, you're everywhere. You're everywhere.
You know, and in St. Thomas at the time and up until of recent, the 2 biggest families in St. Thomas on the east side of Jamaica were the Bogles and the Beckfords. And you find that interrelated and intermarriage, the majority of St. Thomas people were married into or were descendants of Bogles. Oh,
okay. And so no, just on that very note then, so have you done a family tree? I'm imagining you have started that some time ago.
That was always something that was within me, but when I was about 12, 13, 14, early, still at school, curiosity led me to ask my father the history of our family, who we really are, who's who, what's what. And my father blew me away with the knowledge what he conveyed to me, to the extent that as a child my head couldn't absorb it, and I had to say, hold on Dad, hold on, let me get a piece of pen and paper and write some of this down.
You're an attentive and studious child.
Right? And what I wrote down or started to write down unbeknown at the time was what became our family's lineage, the pedigree, genealogy of our family, which I've treasured today and extended and expanded upon that, to the extent that on my recent visit to Jamaica, on my mother's side, found out even more interesting history of family members connected within our family that are very prominent figures and were very prominent figures in Jamaica.
Do you know what I have to say? We're going to need more time, because there's so much just on your family history, just on your family legacy, and just on the fact that you've kind of taken on this historic role of documenting all of these things, but we're going to have to ask the Windrush Foundation to
more time.
So, but I want to say thank you very much for coming here today, and I want to say thank you for all the kind of audience members for viewing all of the series of talks. My name is Cindy. I'm part of the Windrush team, and so thank you for your support always.
Thank you.